delegation of rabbis from Israel. They would go to Cairo and they would have a celebration in memory of Maimonides, who was held in high esteem by many of the Arab countries, Egypt among them, because Maimonides flourished in Egypt. So everyone wants to claim him. Spain claims him, Morocco claims him, Egypt claims him. And these rabbis were Hasidic rabbis, so they started to sing and dance. And they were thrown out. They wouldn't let them come back anymore. How could you sing and dance? That's not a religious expression. Couldn't fathom the idea that joy and happiness is part of Judaism, is part of religion. But in many cases, religion is often disassociated from joy and happiness. If you look at all the extremists, the extreme communists, the revolutionaries, they're never happy. They're always very, very sad and serious. You know some revolutionaries that are happy?
What? You gain clapped up vodka.
Oh, okay. So they did deal with vodka. That helps them. But Judaism is absolutely on the record as identifying with joy and happiness. And why is that? Because Judaism is about life. More than any other culture, Judaism sanctifies life. And we are extremists in the way we deal with life.
It's stupid. What does mean for religion?
What does religion mean?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the word means, but the people who follow different religions are called religious people. They believe in a God and they believe in following God's commandments. That's in a nutshell, yes.
The word religion is a Latin word that means literally to bind back. It's kind of like a hillel, but in a broader term.
To bind?
To bind back, to look back, or to reconnect with the original.
Okay, whatever the word means. I don't know if the people who claim to be religious have any idea what the word means. Judaism is about life. And life is movement out of yourself, not being constrained into yourself. Life is expansive, and that's what joy is. And that's why happiness and joy is often associated with gratitude, because gratitude is recognizing the other. It's not just about me. I'm not the center of everything. The other person is the center. And that's what joy is. Joy means I'm going out of myself. And that's what life is all about. Life is all about relating to others, bringing literally children into the world, helping feed people, helping to bring their spirits up. That's all part of life. Where do we find joy emphasized? In the Megillah, in the scroll of Esther, where it says after the miracle, when Haman's plans were thwarted, it says, La Yehudim Haisa Ora V'Simcha V'Sasa V'Kara. The Jews, Yehudim, the Jews had light and joy and happiness and glory. And it identifies the Jews who are into joy as Yehudim. I mentioned this last week, that the word Jew comes from the word Yehuda, comes from the root that means gratitude. When Leah has her fourth child, she calls him Yehuda because she says, now I'm going to really show gratitude to God that I had this child. And that's what a Jew is all about. A Jew is all about self-transcendence, yes? We say that every Saturday night when we make the Havdalah, we recite that verse. So we're always reminded of this, that's right. In our prayers we say, B'chol hachayim, and all those who are alive, Yodu Chasela, will thank you forever. So it identifies thanking with being alive. If you're alive, you thank. If you don't thank, you're not really alive. If you're not happy, you're not really fully alive. All these things go together. So happiness, gratitude, and life are all interchangeable concepts. If you're truly alive, you're grateful, and you're happy. The word chayim in Hebrew, which means life, is a plural word. Because when is life worthy of its name? When it's plural. When it's not just about you, it's about you and your relationship with others. If a person has no relationships, they're not alive. Not only they're not alive figuratively speaking, but most likely their lifespan is going to be shorter on average than people who have relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm talking about all kinds of relationships, not just marriage, friends, parents, children, siblings, and so on. So Judaism is certainly not just allows happiness, allows joy, makes a concession, because I'm sure other religions that are very somber also say, well, once in a while you could be happy. And there's a strain of Judaism, of the Jews, who were very, very somber and didn't allow people to be happy. In fact, in the Talmud, it's rooted in the Talmud that a certain rabbi was very happy, and the other rabbis were not happy with that, because after the destruction of the temple, the Jewish people are not able to express their joy and happiness. But that doesn't mean that we can't be happy. It just means that under some conditions we have to limit some of the outward expressions of that happiness to recognize the suffering that goes along with being in exile. But even so, the Baal Shem Tov reversed that. The Baal Shem Tov got rid of outward displays of sadness and promoted the idea of joy and happiness. And that's what the Hasidic community adopted as one of its major tenets. If you see pictures depicting Hasidim, you'll see them dancing. That's the way artists will describe a Hasidic Jew. He's always joyful, always singing and dancing. In Judaism, and especially according to the Hasidic view, happiness is not an option. It's a religious, spiritual, and moral obligation. It is all three. Religious, which means it comes from a religious source, Psalm 100. We recite this every day, every weekday. Serve God with joy. So serving God with joy would probably mean when you're in the synagogue, you have to serve God with joy. No, you have to serve God every minute of your day. As King Solomon says, in all of your ways you shall know him. Or as it says in the Mishnah, all that you do has to be for the sake of heaven. So whatever you're doing, whether it's eating, sleeping, doing business, leisure, everything ultimately has to be a way of serving God. And since it says you have to serve God with joy, that means whatever you do, you have to have joy. Now, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's easy. It's a major challenge. This is one of the most difficult things, to be happy all the time. The Baal Shem Tov said something very powerful. I heard it in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, in the name of other great Hasidic masters, but the point is that when you commit a sin, what causes you to do the sin? The Yetzer Hara, your evil impulse. We all have a good impulse and an evil impulse. So the Baal Shem Tov says, the evil impulse doesn't want you to sin. That's not his goal. He wants you to feel depressed after you sin. That's the goal. Because once you're depressed, he owns you. Or as another Hasidic master said, Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, it's no sin to be depressed. Nowhere will you find in the Bible, thou shalt not be depressed. It doesn't say that. But there is not a single sin that depression will not lead to. Depression could lead to everything wrong. Now, this is not judging, making a judgment that people who are depressed are bad people. Depression could be an illness and has to be treated. But when a person wallows in their depression, and there's many people, I think, they want to feel miserable. They're looking to feel miserable. Why do people want to feel miserable? Because then they become the center of attention. Their focus is on themselves. And if their focus is on themselves, being happy negates that. They don't want to be happy. Well, Judaism says that you don't have that choice. You have to be happy. That's the religious component of it. You have to serve God with joy. The second part, the spiritual part, if you are in a state of happiness, you will be open to spiritual experiences. Prophets would only be prophets, can only get prophecy if they were in a state of joy. Jacob, the patriarch, for 22 years was depressed. Why was he depressed? Because Joseph had been taken away from him. And until he reunited with Joseph, he was depressed. And what were the consequences of his depression? Even though he was a prophet and God spoke to him, for 22 years he did not get any communication from God. Why? Because God only communicates to people when he does, for those people who are worthy, when they're in a state of joy, when their soul is allowed to express itself, because that's what joy is in the spiritual sense. It's the ability for your soul to express itself, your godly soul. And as long as he was free, he couldn't allow himself to be receptive to the divine communication. So that's the spiritual part of it. Then there's the moral imperative. Just like we can't smoke in public, at least in recent times, you can't do a lot of things that people would normally do in public. So we cannot be sour, dour, bitter in public. Your face is public property, as someone once said. So if you're going around with a long nose, very depressed, you're creating an atmosphere of sadness that other people feel the misery, and you're harming them as well. So it's a moral obligation, even if you don't feel happy, to not show your sadness. And again, we're not talking about a person who lost a close relative and is sitting shiva. And that's the period of time when it's mandated that you show sadness. Or Tisha B'Av is the national day of mourning for the destruction of the temple and all the other great tragedies. Those are days when you're supposed to show sadness. But even on Tisha B'Av, Hasidim would do things to minimize the sadness, not to wallow in the sadness. They tell a story of one of the Yalta Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was hosting one of his colleagues, Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, who was a very holy man in his own right. And this is Tisha B'Av, and there was a young man who was taking burrs and throwing it around to create a little bit of frivolity, a little bit of levity on Tisha B'Av. People shouldn't get carried away with their sadness, because sadness can be very destructive. And Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin was indignant, and he said, these young men have caused the destruction of the temple because they don't take Tisha B'Av seriously. Hours later, Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin was strolling with the Alter Rebbe, and they're outside of the town, and they see far away someone sitting on the ground covered with ants, those biting ants, and crying bitterly for the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin said to the Alter Rebbe, such young men will help to rebuild the temple. And the Alter Rebbe says, it's the same young man. It's the same one who was throwing the burrs and creating an atmosphere of levity that was crying for the destruction of the temple. So there was a Hasidic custom to do things that would take away some of the sadness, because wallowing in sadness is not healthy. And even though we're mandated to do it, we shouldn't really get kicks out of it. Some people love to be sad, as I said before. On the mystical level, joy is a sign of life, and therefore it's godly. Why? Because, as I mentioned last week, God is identified with joy. Because what is joy? What is happiness? When you're able to be open, completely open, your soul is not constricted in any way, is not stifled, is not impaired, and has no ability to express itself. God doesn't have any limits on him. So we would say that God is the source of joy, of life, and therefore of joy. Yes? Oh, I thought you had a question. As it says in the biblical book of Chronicles, and we say this in our prayers every day, in his place, in God's place, there is strength and joy. So if a person is happy, you're emulating God. And part of what is Judaism all about? Judaism is about emulating God, bringing God into our lives. When a person is happy, and it's a sign of life, that means God is present. Why does Judaism revere life so much? Because where do you see God's presence in this world? There are many hints to his presence, but where do you see it very openly and vividly? In life. That's why when a person dies and a person touches a dead body, they become tameh. They're considered to be ritually unclean until they go through a purification process. Because God identifies with life. When there's an absence of life, we are receptive to negative forces. And that's one of the reasons when we wake up in the morning, we have to wash our hands. Why do we have to wash our hands when we wake up? Because when you're sleeping, sleep is called the 60th of death. Your soul leaves your body to some extent. And when there is a lack of life, which is the way God created us, that we should experience that lack of life, there's a receptivity to negative energy. And by washing hands with water, water is the source of life, we get rid of that negative energy. That's what the whole idea of the mikveh is about, to immerse yourself in life itself as a way of getting rid of different characteristics of death. The great Jewish Talmudist philosopher, Jewish leader and Kabbalist, the Maharal, who lived in the city of Prague over 400 years ago, and he writes the following: divine presence rests on something that is whole, not something that is lacking. Joy goes together with wholeness, completion and perfection, and sadness with lack and fragmentation. God is transcendent and will therefore reveal himself to one whose joy is transcendent, which is called simcha shel mitzvah, the joy that goes with doing a mitzvah. In other words, what he's saying over here is that God identifies with something that's whole. What is whole? A person who's in a state of joy. A person who is broken, a person who's depressed is not whole. There's a part of them that's missing. And we all have that natural state because we have a godly soul. But we also have an animal soul. If you allow your godly soul to express itself, you will be in a state of joy. If you allow your animal soul to overpower the godly soul, you'll be depressed. As someone once pointed out, the animal soul starts off being very happy, but ends up miserable. Godly soul is always happy, except when suppressed. People are only not happy when they're not allowed to express their natural state. And when we are happy, that means that our inner soul is allowed to be expressed. And that does 5 things. It gives you more energy. A happy person is more energetic, is not lethargic. Number 2, it gives you the strength, because you have more energy, to overcome temptation and curb our evil impulse. When a person loses the battles with their evil impulse, it's because they're depressed. That's why that Rabbi Arav Kolin said, depression is not a sin per se, but it can lead to every other sin because you don't have the defenses. There's always a struggle. We have a perennial struggle between the good impulse and the negative impulse. In order to win the battle, you have to have the strength. And where do you get the strength from? Only if you're happy. Being happy also gives you the ability to love God and to love another unconditionally. If you are not happy, as I said before, you're self-absorbed. You're just thinking about yourself. So you can't love God because my life isn't the way I expected it to be. I'm not getting everything I think is due to me. So you don't really care for God. And how could you love another unconditionally? You'll only love them if they do you favors, because then it's selfish. But to love unconditionally is selfless. You can't be selfless if you're so self-absorbed. And ultimately, with joy, you can change the world. You can make an impact on the whole world. Last week I already explained that joy, just like a king, has the power to break through barriers. Legally speaking, a king, a Jewish king in the days when we had the monarchy, it has to make a trip from one point to another, and the quickest way is to go through someone else's property, and there's a fence there. He has the legal right to break through fences, even though a king is not allowed to take your property. If a king decides, I'm the king of this country, I rule it, and you have a nice car, I'll take your car. He can't do that. That's a terrible sin. The king has to follow the laws, unless you're the leader of Russia. Okay, but and there were evil kings who didn't care about that. King Ahab, as in English, when he crossed into America through Ellis Island. But he's allowed to break through your fence because he has to get from point A to point B. But what does that mean spiritually? A king is someone who is so confident, who's so determined to do what he has to do, that there are no barriers. And that's what a happy person has. The same expression is applied to a happy person, that joy breaks through barriers. The reason why there are barriers in life is because we create those barriers because of our own inadequacies, our own limits. When you are in a state of joy, you're in an expansive state and nothing stands in your way. And what are those barriers? One example is you have someone you don't like, but he comes to the wedding of your child. There's no greater joy than the wedding of a child. There's nothing greater than that, even more than your own marriage, that you can marry off a child. That's the greatest joy. And when you have that great joy and someone who you don't like comes to the wedding, you'll go and embrace him. Now, I know some people won't do that, but that's because they're really in a very bad place. But a person who is extremely happy and expresses this tremendous joy will overlook the reasons why they have this negative feeling towards another. It'll break through the barrier. But also within ourselves there are barriers between our mind and our heart, between our heart and our actions. You can have the right idea, but it doesn't affect the way you feel. You can have the right feelings, but it doesn't necessarily affect the way you behave. But if you are in a state of joy, that'll open up the different barriers. That's one of the reasons why music is so powerful, because music, in some cases, not all cases, depends on the music, is a source of joy. And when you have, that's why prophets would play music before they would get their prophetic experience. Music creates windows between your mind and your heart and your actions. And that's why, but it's the same thing, the same concept that's said about song is about joy. Joy breaks through barriers, creates windows, and gets rid of those internal barriers. Yes?
I never thought about this. Today, you make my point. Often I start my lesson when students come to me from one song. I didn't know what this is a Hasidic song. If you're happy and you long like you can, if you know, that's right, speak of all say it. So, is what I am the fact of what do you learn it on Shabbat and say dance and say, okay, so
Yes, it works.
So it's Hasidic song, yeah?
The idea is Hasidic. The melody is not.
Who knows?
But yeah, that's right. Who knows? What is it about the king that gives him this power? The king, because he has all the power he needs, and no one could stand in his way until he's assassinated. But the king is confident. He says, I am committed to a certain goal, and there's nothing that will stand in my way. That's a resolute person, and that's what a happy person is. A happy person is someone who has such confidence, knowing exactly what his goal is, and that he could accomplish it. Who do we find? The first person, the first king of the Jewish people was Yehuda. Joseph also, but Yehuda, Judah, where the word Jew comes from, whose name represents gratitude and therefore joy, when his father refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt. The background of the story is Joseph was acting as if he didn't know his brothers, as if he was just the viceroy of Egypt. And he says to the brothers, I don't trust you, you're spies. I'll only know you're telling the truth if you can bring your brother Benjamin. And Jacob said, no, absolutely not. I can't let my son Benjamin go because we already lost a son, Joseph. I'm going to lose another son. But they were brothers from the same mother, from Rachel. And Reuven tries to get his father to agree. And he says, if I don't bring him back, you can kill 2 of my sons. And Jacob rejects that. He said 2 of my sons, not all 4. He had 4 sons. And then Judah later on comes to him and says, I guarantee it, I will bring him back. And Jacob lets him take him. What was the difference between Reuven and Yehuda? They both offered something out of the ordinary. Reuven says that you can take the lives of my 2 sons. In other words, I will bring him back. Just like I don't want to lose my 2 sons, that's how I will guarantee bringing him back. And he doesn't accept that. And Judah, he does accept, because Reuven was coming and saying, I'm guaranteeing to bring him back. I'm giving you a 99% guarantee, but not 100%. Why? Because he said 2 of my sons. If he wanted to really make his point, he should have said, you can kill all my sons. Why did he say 2? Because he had an insurance policy. Just in case he fails, he'll still have 2 sons left. Jacob says, that's not the one I can trust. Judah says, I will guarantee it. If I don't bring him back, I am finished in this world. I'm finished in the next world. I will be obliterated totally from existence. And Jacob says, oh, now he's talking. That's a guarantee. That's what a king is. Yehuda was the king of all his brothers, and from him emerged the dynasty of King David, and ultimately Mashiach is a descendant of Yehuda. A king is someone who says, I am so confident that I will succeed, so that he can break through every barrier. That's what a happy person is. A happy person is someone who is so confident in everything, has such implicit trust in God. And that's why Yehuda is the progenitor, the ancestor of kings, a dynasty of kings, and Mashiach. And it's interesting that Mashiach, if you write it in Hebrew, and you rearrange the letters, it spells Yismach, or Yisamach. He will rejoice, or he will make others rejoice. That Mashiach is identified with joy. And Rabbi explains why the Rabbi once said that perhaps the one thing that we're lacking to bring Mashiach is to express ourselves with unmitigated joy. Not joy because of some particular factor, but just pure joy. Pure joy is the power of Mashiach to overcome all the negatives and get us out of exile. So people who ask the question, now that's going on in Israel, and there's unfortunately hostages that are suffering and the soldiers are suffering, how could we be happy? And the answer is, happiness is the greatest weapon that we have. And that while we have to, on one side of the Zohar, he puts it this way, it says on one side of our heart we can be sad for the suffering and pain. At the other side of our heart we have to express joy and happiness. And it's not easy to balance the two, but Jews have been accustomed to doing things that are not easy. So what is the meditation for joy? So we have over here, how many things over here? The joy of being alive, the joy of being human, the joy of being a sentient being, the joy of ability to serve God, joy of being Jewish, the joy of mitzvot, the joy of knowing the power of tshuva, of repentance, and the joy of knowing that we are on the threshold of redemption. So let's start it. I don't think we'll finish all of this, but we'll start it and maybe we'll continue next week. Why be joyous? The joy of being alive. God did not have to create us. Unlike God, we are not absolute beings. God is absolute. God is not here because he was put here. He is here because he is here. He's absolutely here. You can't conceive of anything without God. Could you conceive of something without us? Yes, you could conceive of a world without us. We can conceive of a world without all the galaxies. If God would have made only one galaxy, the Milky Way, would that have been inconceivable? No, but he decided to make more galaxies. Or whatever there is in existence is called Efsheri Hamatzias. It's possible for it to exist. It doesn't have to exist. God is the one thing that is Mechuyev Hamatzias. He must exist by definition. That's how you define God. An existence that must be here. So we don't have to be here. So God created us. So we have to be joyous that we were created, that we could have not been created. And therefore, every moment of life is precious and should be savored. That's one source of joy, just knowing that we are alive. And it works the other way around. We're happy because we're alive, but the happiness itself contributes to our health, physically to our good health. So joy at being alive. Then there's joy of being human. We could have been any other creature. We could have been a rock. We could have been a plant. We could have been an animal. God created us as humans. And what is the distinction of a human being? When God creates Adam, the Torah says God created him in the image of God. That means, yes?
I wanted to interject a thought on a lecture that I heard 25 years ago from Rabbi from Jerusalem, that he taught that there was a Kabbalistic teaching that the way God has created man is that his head is above his heart and his appetites, where animals are all on the same plane. So our charge is to use our intellect and our mind to negotiate both our emotions and our appetites.
Yes, that's true. So we are, number one, created in the image of God. What does that mean, created in the image of God? So one of the explanations is that just like God has free choice, obviously, he can choose whatever he wants, God endowed us with free choice. But whatever that means, there's something unique about a human being, every human being. And that every human being is indispensable. Someone once said, I don't know, I'm not sure who the original, I think it was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, that what is a birthday? A birthday is the day in which God says, the world couldn't exist without you. That's why you were born this day. That's why when we celebrate a birthday, it's more than just a milestone in life, but it's the day that God says, you are unique. I created you because the world couldn't exist without you. Sometimes people, when they get older, when they're young, they anticipate birthdays. But when they get older, I'm going to be an old man, an old woman, and they dread their birthday. But that's wrong. Birthday is a day that God says, let's say you're 80 years old, God says that the 80th time he's telling you you're special. So why should you get upset? Sometimes you know you're special, you're told you're special, but then you think, well, maybe I'm not special anymore. But you reach a milestone, another birthday, God says, you're still special. I still love you. And that fact that we're loved is a great source of joy. When someone knows that he or she is loved, you're in a state of joy. What's the difference between people will say, look, I have my pet, I love my pet, my dog is unique, and everything about animals that is very good and special, but there are seven differences between a human and an animal. Only humans can search for a purpose in life. Does the dog wake up in the morning and say, what's my purpose in life? Why am I here? Doesn't have that issue. A human being searches for truth. Not all human beings, because not all human beings take advantage of their humanity. They don't necessarily live like a human being in every respect. Human beings strive for self-improvement. Not all human beings, but that's a human characteristic. Human beings can sacrifice for a total stranger. Human beings will jump into the water to save someone and drown. Even though they know their life was in danger, they're going to go out of their way to save someone. Not every human being will do that, but that's something that an animal doesn't go through the thought of an animal to sacrifice itself. I think the next one is the most significant one. A human being makes decisions that are morally right against the human being's nature. My nature is to do certain things, but I'm not going to do it because I know it's morally wrong. I want to do it, but I'm not going to do it. And a human being could forgive. So that's the sixth. A human being could forgive. Someone attacks the dog, and the dog doesn't like it, and you say to the dog, I'm sorry. The dog will not forgive you. The dog may decide not to harm you because it knows there are consequences. Dogs know consequences. But a human being could forgive. That is what is uniquely human. Then this joy of being a sentient being, which goes along with being human. But what happens to a human being, God forbid, who's in a coma? They're not in pain. Would anyone say that that's a good thing or acceptable? If someone tells you, give you a choice, you can be in a coma for 10 years, or you could be living 10 years and not have the ideal life. And being in a coma is unthinkable for a human being, because part of being human is being a sentient being, have the intelligence, have the ability to think. And the greatest pain would be for a person not to be conscious. Consciousness is extremely vital to our well-being as humans. Then there's the joy of the ability to serve God. Every human being has the ability to connect to God by serving Him, which makes your life meaningful. Even in the most remote situations where you think, I can't serve God because I am in prison, or in any other situation where your abilities are constrained, you can still serve God. And there's a story, a very famous story, of the two Hasidic masters who were brothers. One was Rabbi Zusha, and one was Rabbi Elimelech. I'm sure you heard this story from me or others once before. They were thrown into prison for some trumped up charges, and those prisons in those days, compared to prisons today, were really prisons. Prisons today would be country clubs compared to the prisons they had in Russia. But the prison was one big room with dozens of inmates, and there was a huge vat in the center of the room, and that's where everyone would dump their excrement. And the stench was horrible. This is unbearable punishment for people who were thrown into prison. And the two brothers were really very depressed because there's a Jewish law, the Torah's law, that you're not allowed to pray or study Torah or even think Torah in a room that is filled with excrement. So their whole joy of life was their ability to serve God, and now they couldn't. And then one of the brothers, I don't remember which one it was, started to sing and dance. So the other brother looked at him and said, are you crazy? Why are you so happy? He says, why are you depressed? He said, I'm depressed because I can't pray, I can't study Torah. Says, well, why does it make you depressed? Because I can't serve God. He says, well, the same God that says to study Torah and to pray tells you you're not allowed to study Torah, you're not allowed to pray. So by you not praying and studying Torah, you're serving God. And the other brother realized that he was right, and they started to sing and dance. As soon as they started singing and dancing, the other prisoners who were not very happy, that cheered them up, and they started to sing and dance. And the prison warden, who was standing outside, hears this ruckus. He runs in and he looks at the people. He says, why are you singing and dancing? Who started this? And they point to the two rabbis, the two brothers. He says, why are they singing and dancing all of a sudden? And they said that they pointed to the big vat of waste. He says, it's because of that. They're excited about it. And the warden says, well, I'm going to take it away from them. He ordered that it be removed to the next room. And of course, they were able to serve God the other way. This story illustrates beautifully how there's no such thing as a situation in which you can serve God. Because even when God tells you, don't do this, don't serve me, that itself is serving him. And in Judaism, that's the beauty of Judaism, unlike other religions, there's a time for you to be religious, to be spiritual, during prayers, during holidays, but then there's a time that you're not serving your God and you're not being religious and spiritual. In Judaism, there's no such thing. As I like to use the example, walking down a supermarket aisle is not a religious experience for most people. I know some people enjoy shopping, but men generally don't like shopping. And you go into a store, if you're a man, try on the coat, it fits, okay, how much is it? $100, here's the money, and you're out within 2 minutes. That's generally the way men are. So walking down a supermarket aisle is not a religious experience, especially if you're a man. But then, if you're searching for food, you're looking at a can, searching for the insignia that it's under supervision, an OU, an OK, a Chav K, a Star K. There are hundreds of different organizations that supervise that a product is kosher. You're walking down the aisle of a supermarket, to use as an example, is a religious experience. It's no less spiritual and religious than praying on Yom Kippur. Just a different form, a different way. So that's the greatness, that you could serve God every day of the year, every minute of the day, and every different situation in which you find yourself. And then we come to perhaps what is the greatest source of joy, the joy of being Jewish, the joy of being part of the chosen people who were chosen with a special mission. I know today being Jewish is being challenged by a lot of anti-Semites, but I never saw this in all my life. In all my 39 years, I've never seen such. It's just wanton anti-Semitism. Young people talking about wiping out 6-7 million Jews in Israel to leave room for a bunch of terrorists, rapists, murderers, that they should have the land. And that's young people in colleges. If I had the power, this is going on YouTube, but if I had the power, I would shut down every university that allows students to protest for the Hamas. I would shut down every university and arrest all of the student leaders who are organizing these things, because this is unprecedented, and that the politicians are not going crazy because of this. Imagine if this would be done against blacks. People would be saying, let's wipe out Ghana, a country in Africa, or Nigeria, or any of the other countries where black people dominate. These people wouldn't survive a minute. This would be the end. This would be the end. But precisely because we're seeing all this anti-Semitism, this gives us the ability to reflect on how special we are as Jews. And that's why they hate us, because we are so special and they are so not special. They are so ignorant, and evil. And evil cannot stand righteousness. So when we hear this anti-Semitism, we should not only not feel threatened and feel somehow that we're diminished in any way. On the contrary, we should feel that we're even more special, because if we wouldn't be so special, he wouldn't be opposed to us. And we have a special mission and a special relationship with God, in addition to what every human being has, and every human being is chosen for a special mission. But we're chosen within the chosen. It's like in an army. They choose when there's a conscription. They will choose which people they want to take in the army. But within the army itself, there are those who are chosen to be part of the special forces, and the special forces have special training, special obligations, greater risk, and greater sacrifice, and so on and so forth. Well, in that sense, everyone in the world, every human being is chosen by God with a mission to make the world a civilized world, and the Jewish people were chosen within the chosen people to do special things. And then we have the joy of mitzvot, the joy to doing a mitzvah. Every mitzvah, the word mitzvah, besides meaning commandment, also means connection. Every mitzvah connects us to God. Every mitzvah validates our existence. If ever we have a question, is my existence necessary? Well, you did a mitzvah. If you wouldn't be here, that mitzvah could not be done. You do count. You are legitimate. And every mitzvah we do accelerates the coming of Mashiach and their final redemption. Every mitzvah connects us not just to God, but to who we really are. And then there are special mitzvahs that we have, especially this month, the month of Adar, the special mitzvah to be joyous. Okay, we'll stop over here and maybe we'll continue this next week. Any questions? Yes, both of you at the same time.
And the facility that can I be backshot
Sure.
to the and to the changing the animal? I'll hear it just as easy.
That's okay. The police are already on their way here to arrest you, But
It's the bond of the conditionally.
yes, because that's the nature of a dog when it's trained properly.
Who was sold of the job.
Okay. But because the dog recognizes that you're nice to it and you're trying to help it, so it's a natural. I'm not saying dogs can't be trained to do things, heroic things, but it's part of the nature of the dog. We are capable as human beings to forgive, even if the other person is not going to be nice to us from now on. We have the ability to override our feelings and our nature, and that's uniquely human. But I do recognize, of course, animals have, especially dogs, have rescued people and sacrificed even for their master. But that's part of the training. If you don't train the dog, it's not going to do any of those things. And human beings, even if they're trained to do the opposite, could do what's right. Or conversely, if he's trained to do the wrong thing, can do the right thing, can do the wrong thing. We have free choice. That's one of the unique things about a human being. Yes.
The stuff at the mill, the school day that you consider actually something.
A happy person? Oh, interesting question. King David was one of the most oppressed people. He had problems with his father-in-law. Nothing about his mother-in-law. That's strange. I don't know if there's anything. But with his father-in-law, with his wives, with his children, with his general, he implements all that. He expresses that. But at the same time, King David expresses the greatest joy. King David expressed all the different emotions. That's why the book of Psalms is so unique, because it brings out all of your emotions. And I'm not saying that a person can't be somber and serious and even sad at certain times, but a person has to know that the sadness has to lead to joy. You can't just wallow in the sadness. In one of King David's Psalms, Psalm 51, he talks about how crushed he is and everything. Then he says, "Tashmi'eni sasam b'simcha," bring me to joy and happiness. And when some people have a midnight prayer where they lament the destruction of the temple, it goes along with crying, and then afterwards they're supposed to be in a state of joy. How the importance of joy is so great that there's a section in Deuteronomy where it talks about the curses that God directs against the people for not behaving. And one of the curses is attributed to, because you didn't serve God with joy when you had so much abundance of good. So not having joy is considered a reason for suffering and pain. Because not having joy means you don't appreciate all these things that we just described now. So even though there's no technical commandment in the Torah, don't be depressed, it's evident that the Torah doesn't want you to be depressed. And everything you can do to take away the depression, you're obligated to do. Yes?
In that, like in Levity where you crush the glass, or in the Passover Seder where you recount the suffering of the Jews in Egypt, and you have the bitter herbs.
And we eat, right? But the end result is we eat the bitter herbs, but we drink 4 cups of wine. There's much more emphasis put on the happy parts. We eat the matzah, the 4 cups of wine. We say Hallel, we sing praises. So, in fact, the joy is even greater when you reflect on the negatives, and then you talk about the positive. The positive is much stronger. When positive comes in contrast with the negative, it's much more appreciated.
Can you like no hero? You have to feel some pain.
Yes, if you wouldn't feel pain, you would be a callous person. Okay.
Rabbi, can you differentiate again, just repeat, the distinction between the moral dimension of joy from spiritual and religious dimensions?
Okay, they're interchangeable. Moral is also spiritual and it's also religious, but I separated them because when a person is sad, it's a violation of a religious imperative, but it's also you're harming other people. That's what I meant by the moral. It's not just what you're doing between you and God, but it's what you're doing for the other people. They're looking at you and they're seeing your sour face that makes them sad and depressed. And as someone said, that your face is public property. Yes.
Loved she referred both she said about music and how increased joy can lead to appeal.
Okay, there's an expression cited in Jewish legal sources, koil, your voice, it refers specifically to musical voice, ma'ir hakavana, awakens concentration. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said that the word kavana, which means concentration, is also related to an Aramaic word that means windows. When Daniel was in prison and he was praying, he prayed towards the window. Chavein, which means window in Aramaic, is the same as kavana, which is Hebrew for concentration. And what it means is that when you sing, that not only awakens your feelings, but it also creates windows. And he explained that there's a barrier that exists, a natural barrier between your mind and your heart, which means you can understand how good something is or how bad something is, and it won't affect your emotions. It remains intellectual concept, and that's it. And then even if you have a feeling for something, you have a feeling of compassion for people who are suffering, and then you're asked to do something for them, and it doesn't work. Doesn't translate into action because there's a barrier. So music removes barriers, opens windows to those barriers.